Hey guys, let me figure out how to pin this comment. Diana will be joining us in about a minute. Diana Mansour. Hello everyone. On racial police, racial profiling. So Diana needs a couple minutes. I just spoke to her. I am going to introduce this and pin the comment because I saw a Muslim gangster do that last time. And I liked it. Profiling. So just hang with me for a second. Pin comment. Yay. Okay. So this is a brand new series. Shameless plug for our other series. We have one series called Amplify Black Voices. The purpose of that series is to amplify the voices of Black members of Arab communities, whether it be in Dearborn or all across the United States. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that series just because I think, unfortunately, in our communities, it's easy to be in an echo chamber with all of our friends and just kind of, have a lot of non-Black Arab friends and not realize the ways that our communities might be inclusive for us, but might not feel that way for Black members of that community. So that's number one. Number two is we have our book club series. We are almost done reading The New Jim Crow. We actually finished that next week. That's the Know Better, Do Better series. So I'm telling you this so that if this is your first time joining us, thank you for being here. But there's a lot of great content for you to tune into. And last but not least, this is a new series called Own Your Lane. So Own Your Lane is inspired by, I think I read like a post about like there's just different lanes in this, and specifically by this I mean the injustices that the Black community specifically is experiencing, and in the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole. We all have a different lane and a different role that we can and should be playing. And so this series is spotlighting Arabs in the community who have really found and owned their lane. This first episode is Diana Mansour, who will be joining us soon. And for those of you who don't know, years back, 14 years ago, Diana's little brother Ali Husseiki and my neighbor, actually literally 5 houses down right here, Osama Abdul Hassan, were racially profiled by the police in Ohio. I'll let her get into the details of the story because she obviously experienced it through her brother firsthand. But they were profiled for no other reason than being Arab and Muslim men. And the reason that this story is coming to light today is because we know that this is an issue that happens to the Black community at a disproportionate level. Black people are brutalized. There's really no other word for it. Brutalized by the police and by law enforcement. And in an effort to try to get more people in communities like Dearborn to care about this issue, even if it doesn't uniquely impact us in the same ways that it impacts Black people, especially if it doesn't, we are trying to draw the parallels between things that we experience. In an ideal world, we would just care because it's an issue that, affects people, anyone, and we should care and we should be champions for that. But we also understand that sometimes if it hits closer to home, we can kind of draw those connections. So as soon as Yasmin, as soon as Deanna gets on here, she's going to tell that story. We spoke earlier today, and it was just, I experienced it because my dad was like involved with it and just kind of like really dumbfounded that these two of his students were being profiled that way. 2 great students, 2 student athletes. And so, yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate that this is actually her first time being able to tell that story since it happened. So we will wait for her to join. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the comments. I can hopefully read them and then get to us or get to them in our conversation. But yeah, that's kind of my intro. See if she's here yet. There she goes. Hi, Diana. All right, let's get started. You all are in for a treat. Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
I just introduced you. I think the part that's funny that I forgot to mention is that you taught me chemistry in ninth grade.
Yeah.
So that was that's
It was
definitely
10th
a fun
grade. Yeah,
fact.
10th grade.
10th grade.
I
I think
taught
I was
you. I taught, uh,
Shireen Barada. I just remember Shireen being in my class.
uh-huh.
It was first or second hour, so I was still like, cranky in the morning. So that I don't remember much other than being shy because you were my teacher and I grew up with your family.
You know, it's funny. I have so many students who are like older now.
Yeah.
So when they see me, I'm like, oh my God,
But you look
I'm
the same.
getting old.
No, you look like a baby. You look the same. I'm sure people in the comments can attest to that.
It's funny because I feel like I've taught everybody, you know?
That's how it is in Dearborn. You know how it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I just introduced the series. I introduced you and kind of a little bit about what you're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, well, I didn't introduce you the way that we introduced you on the page. So Deanna graduated from Fortson High School. She's also an educator. She is pursuing her PhD or pursued your PhD. And I didn't get exactly what it is that you studied, but I know kind of like through our conversation today, the kinds of things that you were looking into. But if you want to introduce that part, I don't want to mess it up.
No, sure. So I am working on my PhD, and the program is Curriculum in Critical Social Inquiry. So socialism is a big piece of this. And my minor is ESL.
Okay.
So I work with newcomers, and basically the focus has been on immigrants or children of immigrants.
Okay.
It's basically where my focus has been.
Cool. That makes sense.
And of course, for sure, it's science and literacy. So that's, science has to be in there.
Yeah. I love that. We can get into that a little later, but I loved what you said about just reframing the way that you look at teaching science. Mm-hmm. So before we talk about that, I think a lot of people on here are familiar with like the headlines, unfortunately, but may not be familiar with the backstory. So I would love for you to tell the backstory on just the experience that is bringing us here together today, that happened to your brother Ali and to Osama and to your family, quite frankly. And don't skip a beat because I'm sure people haven't heard it this way ever.
Okay, so this is like, 14 years ago? This was August of 2006. And the reason why I remember the month is because that was the month that I got married. Mm-hmm. And this all happened about 2 weeks before my wedding. So it was a pretty stressful time. Ali, so I'll go back and forth. We all know that that's interchangeable. The family, we call him Alushi. So him and Osama they were new in college. And in the summertime, they wanted to make some extra money. And so they decided to partner up with a local business who was offering them commission to collect prepaid cell phones. And they were basically being sold at Radio Shacks and Walmarts throughout the nation for a very low price. And so that was a benefit to the business owner. And so that way, when they would go and pick them up for him, making that commission was easy for them, and it was good for that business. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was they basically had a map, and they were traveling from Michigan down through all the way down to I think North and South Carolina, from what I remember. I could be wrong, but I remember looking at the map of how they had it all planned out, and they had all of the Walmarts and the Radio Shacks all marked off. And so what happened was they were still in, and they had done this before. This was not the first time that they did it. I think they had done it once before. And they found that it was worth it for them. And so they decided to do it again. And so they were driving my mom's car, and they got to Ohio. And when they were in Ohio, they were running low on gas. And so they decided to take the next exit out, and that was Marietta. Okay, and the city makes a difference. Mm-hmm. All right. So they stop in Marietta, and they want to fill up gas, but they notice that there is a Radio Shack and a Walmart right off that exit, right by the station. So they figured they'd why don't they just hit those 2 places before they leave? Like, even though it wasn't something that was planned. So they went into the Radio Shack, and there's a limit to how many cell phones you can get. So each got the limit that they were allowed to get. And I'm not sure of anything happening in the store, but I do remember something related to some kind of vibe that happened. Okay. And that's pretty much where I think asking Hale or Osama about this would probably be really useful, because no one's going to understand that vibe like they do, right? But I know that there's something happened inside, but I'm not sure exactly what. But as soon as they walked out, Alushi saw that she was taking down the license plate number of one of the workers. She was taking down the license plate. And Alushi's like, what are you doing? And I remember having this conversation with Alushi, and he's like, you don't understand. This lady was frightened. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, what do you mean frightened? Like, frightened.
Especially like, knowing your brother. Like,
yeah, but because of the way that he looks, you know, he's got the typical Arab features. And so we all do in the family, right? And so that's basically what sparked it. And I think, and I remember when he told me this, I just felt like the only thing I was able to connect with at the time is 9/11 and people hating us. I didn't really think about the fear. I thought about them hating, you know, but it was legit fear. She was scared. And I didn't, like, I remember, like, he was, he's like, no, Diana, like, she was seriously afraid of me. It wasn't even that she hated me. She was afraid and wanted nothing to do with me. So she immediately ran back inside, and she, like, made some facial expression and just walked back in. I'm seeing a lot of the comments. Are you reading them? Because I'm, like, getting distracted.
I'm not seeing comments. I'm so sorry your family went through that.
Oh, okay.
I'm seeing people joining. I haven't been seeing comments, but
okay.
Yeah, try not to get distracted by them.
Yeah.
Unless you want to, if you want to talk to people, feel free. And if people want to ask questions, we can try to get to
them. That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, they get back in the car and they go to fill up gas. And while they're filling up gas, they spot the police car at the bank across from them. I believe that's what it was. And so Alishi tells Osama, he tells him, okay, I don't think we should go. I think this is what happened. They decided not to go to the Walmart. They just wanted to get out of town. Was basically what it was. They wanted nothing to do with that place at that point. And so they finish filling up gas. Alicia tells him, watch out, there's a cop car at the bank across from us. So make sure you're careful when you're driving. Okay. So they get back in the car and they decide they're just going to get back on the freeway and they want to make a turn. So Alushi tells Osama, I think Osama was the one that was driving, so I could have this mixed up. But he tells Alushi tells Osama, make sure your turn signal is on. Okay, they don't want any excuses for them being pulled over. So they were, not even for something really small. And so they put their turn signal on and they get pulled over. They ask why they're pulled over, and they said that it was because they didn't put their turn signal on. Okay. Now, when Alushi was telling me the story, I'm like, what do you mean? Are you sure you put the turn signal on? Like I'm still thinking, like, this is how naive I was. Like, are you sure you didn't put the turn signal on? And he's like, yeah, no, I'm telling you, this was the conversation I had with him. I told him to turn the turn signal on. They were hyper aware of the situation. And I don't know what it was that made them so hyper aware, because I'm telling you, I was thinking this way. And it's basically because of the fact that I lived in Dearborn my entire life. And I'm in this bubble of feeling safe in my community, feeling like the police is, here to protect me. And so I didn't think that they would do anything wrong like this, So I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? And he's like, and he was getting frustrated with me, like, yes, this is what happened. They get pulled over, and so they ask, they want to search the car. And they're searching the car and they're asking them questions. And these boys, okay, very young men, boys, are scared now, right? And they're thinking that they have a bunch of phones in their, for no reason, but they have a bunch of phones in their car and they have money in the car, okay? They had $5,000 in cash and they had a $5,000 check from the business owner. And so it was legit. And they're not sure of whether they're doing something wrong or not anymore. Wow. So now they're doubting themselves. And so they lie. Yep. They say that they were doing something. I don't know what it was that they told them, but they told them something related to, it was something for my father or something like that.
Yeah, that's what police intimidation will do to you.
Mm-hmm. And so that was enough for them. Apparently it didn't hold up, right? And so because it didn't, like there was something wrong with what they were saying, so they used that to charge them with obstruction of justice, okay, because they lied to the police. So that was enough to take them in. And again, because of the Patriot Act, they were able to search the car for no reason, just because of the fact that they looked suspicious, right? And that all goes back to, you know, everything that happened with 9/11. So,
don't come in. Give me 2 seconds. I need to lock my door. Okay. Family problem. Cece, take care of the situation for me. I'm on a call. This is me all day with Zoom. But thankfully you understand, because Dearborn problems. Okay, so go on. So we're saying that my little nephews like the lights in my room, so they try to come in whenever they can.
Oh.
So can you just go back for my sake, one sentence, and keep going?
Okay. So they were, because of the obstruction of justice, they took them in. Okay. And that was enough to detain them, basically, just being suspicious, right? And then the obstruction of justice was added on as more reason for them to take them in. I find out later about this, and I'm laughing about it, okay, they'll be out tomorrow, no big deal, you know, this is not a big deal. And then I hear about this changing to the charge changing. They drop the charge and they change it to money laundering in support of terrorism. And when my mom was telling me this, and my mom was like super worried, I'm like, oh, come on. This is ridiculous. How are they going to even prove that? They're going to drop this and they're going to end up coming home and blah, blah, blah. And all of this. I'm still thinking I'm living in Dearborn, and everywhere else is just like Dearborn. Everybody else is around the nation looks at us the way Dearborn looks at us, right? And so then I get a phone call from Lucy, and he's talking to me, and he just wants to talk to me. And I remember him wanting reassurance that everything was going to be okay. And I'm thinking that everything's going to be okay, but I've been giving him I don't know if it was false hope. I don't know what it was, but because of me being naive, I just felt like this is crazy. This is outrageous. This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
We're just not aware. But he tells me, no, Diana, I'm in my cell and I'm seeing it all over TV, and everybody here, they're calling us Al-Qaeda. They're calling us this. And it's on TV. My picture's on TV, and they're saying is this an act of terrorism? And it keeps coming up, and I'm like, what? Are you serious? So then what do? I call the courts to see what happened to what the actual charge was. And when they tell me that it's been, the obstruction of justice charge was dropped and it was turned over to money laundering in support of terrorism, I kid you not, I burst out laughing. And the lady on the phone did not understand why I was laughing. It was that serious to her. And I'm
crazy. They think it's funny.
And I'm laughing like
you're in shock.
Yeah. But that's when it hit me. When I shut the phone, and then I saw it on the news here in Dearborn. And then I hear that it was on Al Jazeera, LBC in Lebanon. So it's not just in the US, it's now gone global on CNN. And so now I start to panic. And that's basically when the news reporter came to our house and I had that reaction, that really strong reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So I'm gonna pause this part because I want the whole aftermath that you still need to get to, and we'll just kill the story right now for anyone worried. Her brother got out of jail, but not with any, inconvenience. Well, not without any inconvenience. But I think what I want to point out now is just this idea that there are, for people who doubt, like, I think this whole conversation around police brutality and people kind of like wanting to use the argument of, I know a good cop, or my family member is a good cop, or, to kind of silence the voices of people like you who are saying that your brother, or someone that was profiled by a not so good cop or someone that wasn't really doing their job. Just speaking to the fact that like a system still has people like that out there, and we think about Breonna Taylor getting shot, in the comfort of her own household, and that the fact that her killers are still there and alive, and that there's like a whole system that supports people getting away with things like that. So we spoke earlier on the phone, and you talked about something around the idea of equity, and I want you to tell people what you told me, because I think it was really powerful when we think about, just this system, this policing system that we have in America, and how flawed it is.
So for me, when I started, the reason why this whole story came back, it's never really gone away, right? So when this story started, like with all of this, once the situation started to like really come to the forefront, like what's really happening, I think in my mind the entire time I was just trying to process this and linking it to Alushi's story, but I didn't really realize that I was doing that, and I never really talked about it. It was just something that was happening in the back of my mind, and I just knew it was consuming a lot of my energy. I'm gonna get emotional right now. So it was consuming a lot of my energy, and I didn't know what it was why it was doing that to me, But I think it was because I had that connection, and I felt selfish to even talk about it, because what we went through is almost an inconvenience compared to what others have gone through. It's just an inconvenience. Like, I'm sitting here talking about this, you know what I mean? But I think that the connection that I was able to make is what I think is so important for us to really talk about. And so my work in this PhD program has really been focused on equity and socialism, and really taking a look at marginalized population, and power struggles, and how do we break those power struggles and those barriers. And thinking about equity in general, I think about education and curriculum. It's not whether or not we can graduate a lot of doctors that determines whether our curriculum is strong. It's what we are doing with that marginalized population to make them successful that determines whether curriculum is good or not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so this goes with anything. So if we're talking about law enforcement, yeah, we've got some good cops, and maybe, like I said, in here in Dearborn, I feel pretty safe. I haven't really encountered anything abnormal for me to think otherwise. I'm sure that other people have had different experiences. Actually, I'm sure, like, I know of particular situations where that's not the case, but for me, I feel okay, but that's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough for me to just feel okay with the cops in Dearborn and think that the cops in Dearborn are doing their job, and that's good enough. It's how is the law enforcement dealing with situations related to a marginalized group.
Right.
That we're not necessarily comfortable with for any reason in this community.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny you say that about Dearborn. We had someone on an IG live series. I don't know if you remember the Williams family during your time at Fortson, but Michael was talking about how he doesn't feel safe. Dearborn is not a safe place for him. A lot of the black community in Detroit that I worked with when I was teaching, Dearborn is that place where they stay away from it because of the cops. So it's just, again, and I think this is the beauty of this platform that you have. I know that you're saying you feel selfish or it makes you feel bad to talk about how your brother's life and your family's life have been inconvenienced or even traumatized by what happened. But I think people in Dearborn will hear it from you and believe you, unfortunately, better than they'll believe members of the Black community when they talk about their horrible experiences with cops. And I think all of us have experienced having family members hear this story and then be like, well, what was he doing? You know, kind of like what you did with Ali, because you trusted the cops and you're like, well, did you really, like, are you sure that you had your signal on? You know, not that that warrants what happened to him. Worst case scenario, he didn't have his signal on. Like, that doesn't mean he gets to spend a week in jail. But I think people need to hear more of these stories so that when Black people are sharing their experiences and another, you know, I don't want to say another, but something like George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, we're not our first mind isn't to question what they were doing wrong. Our first mind should be to question why our law enforcement is brutalizing people instead of protecting them.
That's so true.
So we can go back to the story now because I think people want to hear kind of.
I wanted to say something. I remember you just said something and I wanted to comment on it and I can't remember what it was.
Was it about our family?
If it comes back to me, I'm sure it'll come back.
Okay.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So you said that he called you and he was telling you that it's all over the news.
Yeah. So I mean, that's when the panic happened and we were seeing it all over. And I mean, we have a pretty good support system here in the community for our population. So a lot of people were like, you know, lending a helping hand, you know, wanting to help post bail and things like that. So that was really relieving to know that we have that community to help us. And so that was what happened with that. I mean, alhamdulillah, everything worked out. The charges were eventually dropped. Okay, they didn't have enough for it to stand to go to trial. So we did go to pre-trial. We were there in Ohio. I remember that. And that wasn't a very pretty experience. That whole city was just looking at us like it wasn't even that we were out of towners. It was that they were afraid of us. Just looking at us, they were afraid of us. And so the charges were dropped and they spent an entire week at the county jail. And Alushi, if you ever get him on, he'll tell you about the experience being in the jail and the harassment that they were getting while they were there. They tried to make light of the situation, the two of them. It's a good thing they were together. They kind of like supported each other. And so Osama is just like, yeah, he'll always be a brother to me because not just because he went to school with my brother, not just because I know his family, but because there's that connection there. There's something that happened during that time, you know, and only they know what that feels like, you know, as much as I talk about it, only they know. So that's really what happened. I mean, that was, and we thought that was the end of it. And so I remember having a conversation with Alushi about, and khalas, this is all done with, we're good, you know, you're good, and, you know, stop thinking about it. And I remember him always wanting to sleep. Every time I talked to him, Alushi just he didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to sleep. So you can definitely, I mean, those were all signs of depression and trauma and anxiety and everything. And I'm like, why are you still thinking about this? The charges were dropped. He's like, Diana, go search my name on the internet. Just
Mm.
Google my name. And so even if you Google my maiden name, you'll find the story. That stuff doesn't go away.
Exactly.
And he's like, I'm like, okay, so what? Big deal. Who's gonna go search your name? He's like, yeah, if I wanted to go get a job outside of Dearborn, what's gonna happen? You think I'm gonna get hired somewhere?
Mm.
And I'm like, what do you mean? You can get hired. And I'm still in this, still feeling this like, and I never really thought about it on that point. And then he's bringing attention to these things that I never really thought about. And so he's like, if I were to apply anywhere outside of Dearborn and they just search my name, there's no way they're going to hire me. That's it. And he wanted to quit school. He didn't want to get a college education. And why am I getting a college education? For what? I won't be able to do anything with it. Eventually he did graduate. Alhamdulillah, he graduated. But he wanted to really pursue something more of like for himself. So business is what he wanted to do. He wanted to open up a business, and alhamdulillah, the bakery, King's Bakeries, it's doing well.
Alhamdulillah for King's Bakery. Shameless plug. My favorite is the ma'ani and eggs. Not to lighten the mood, because I think we need to talk about the serious issues, but I do love it. Yeah. So alhamdulillah, he's doing okay. And Osama, I don't want to leave him out. Osama, alhamdulillah, he's been such a great support for this community, and an educator, an amazing individual for this community and our kids. Such a leader, and I'm so proud of them, both of them. But I think to your point, because I talk to Osama frequently. I see him anytime I'm walking down my block, and same with your brother. Anytime I talk about this or ask about, I think in the past year specifically, because I've started to realize how impactful media has been, even in my own viewing of my community or myself, or for those who know my dad's situation, the way that my dad was depicted in the media. And one of the main things that I always think about is what happened with your brother and Osama. And in the past year and a half, I want to say, I'd spoken to each of them about it. And you can tell that it's still, they're still traumatized by this event. And the point that you and I spoke about earlier that I want to bring up again is just, obviously, you kept using the word inconvenience. This has severely inconvenienced your family, and I'll let you get into some of those examples. But the parallel that I would love to draw here is that this has touched our community one time, and we all got traumatized by it at the time. The Black community,
one time.
This happens every day. I have friends that tell me, they grew up on the east side of Detroit, and cops are lurking, not to protect them, or, they're lurking to basically just bully people. We have someone coming on, what's today? Today's Wednesday, next week, to talk about her son's experiences with exactly that. And it's just so wild that people don't realize this affects families. And then if someone, like you said, your brother's charges got dropped, but when you look, the image that is just probably imprinted in his head of his face in that orange suit saying ties to terrorism, that's going to affect somebody's self-esteem. So I think just in light of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and Breonna Taylor and Elijah and all of these names, unfortunately, that we have to say, imagine growing up in America Black and seeing people who look like you constantly represented in this way, or unfortunately constantly being murdered for no other reason than being Black. And that's the thing that just kills me, that we saw this happen one time, for those of us who were around in 2006. And I remember being shook, no other word for it. But imagine seeing that happening to us every single day in America, in the country that is supposedly our country. And I just wish that we kept the energy that we would keep if it were happening to us for other people.
And that's just it. It's we need to know someone who looks like us to understand what others are going through. And it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. But the fact that you're using this platform to do that, maybe over time, this is what my thinking is that this is our way to break those barriers. See, if you understand how the system works, you realize that marginalized populations it purposely works to keep us separated.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're separated and we have this racism, Arab against blacks, blacks against Muslims, and whites. And whenever you have this like separation, you can't come with a united front and see some results, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, where we really need to start thinking, if we want things to happen for us and for our benefit, we have to understand that we need to be able to be there for those who don't look like us,
Right.
so that they can also be there for us. Because I've had conversations with people where it was more of like, well, if right now we're doing all of this and we're standing up for them and whatever, but if we were in trouble, would they be there for us?
Absolutely.
Why? But the point is that, why are we even thinking about that?
It's so stupid, but even then, absolutely. Like,
Right.
I'll tell you a quick example. I have a million examples, but I was in class at Ross at University of Michigan. My professor said something really racist about Palestinians, like the Palestinian terrorists. Like he used them synonymously. And it was between me like raising my hand in front of 100 people just going off on him, or just leaving and writing him a nice email. I chose the latter because I'm like, I need to not be this person right now, because I was heated. I was really angry. So I drafted this really long email, but several of my friends who also happened to be black in that classroom had noticed my anger and understood and deduced that it was because of that comment. And without me asking, without me saying anything, without me even like telling them that I was going to email him, they sent him a nice long email too, which resulted in him like apologizing profusely via writing to the entire class. And then the next class period, literally showing up and apologizing verbally in front of the entire class of 100 people, some of whom are Zionists. So it was pretty ballsy for him to be like in front of people who probably support Israel, like redacting that statement. And I have a million examples like that. Not that I should have to give them, but it's also just a BS argument, because the black community is one of the most welcoming, loving, embracing communities. And I don't even understand how, when other people don't match that energy 9 times out of 10.
And then
one thing, go ahead. Yeah.
No, and I just wanted to add to that. I mean, if we keep like talking about Palestine and we want people to hear us, right? How are we expecting people to hear us? And I mean, how do we expect others to stand with us if we're not doing the same thing? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, we want people to know the truth about Palestine, but we're not like there to support the truth about people who are not necessarily Arab.
Yeah, or even educate ourselves on it. That's
right. That's another point. Very good. Yeah.
This brings me into the thing that we also talked about earlier around the war on terror and the war on drugs. And I kind of want to like really quickly summarize what we talked about, because I think it's really powerful. It's something I've just started to connect. As a lot of people, if you're Arab, as a lot of people know who are on here, the war on terror was a direct result of 9/11 being put on us, and America capitalizing on this moment to make Arabs and Muslims the faces of terrorism in America. When everyone on here should know that we commit terrorist activity at a remarkably lower rate than our white counterparts. I actually have a graph that I'll probably post later, where it's like we are like down all the way down here. In like mass shootings, for example, white people are like up here, and the New York Times statements about us versus them is literally the inverse. So crazy. So it just goes to show you how media is being used as this tool to convince everybody that we should be the ones that people are afraid of. And that's exactly why your brother and Osama got pulled over. And it's this fear tactic, right? Which led to the Patriot Act, you know, America being able to kind of rewrite the laws to make it okay to discriminate against us. Recently, I've been reading a book called The New Jim Crow, and it's kind of helped connect a lot of dots. I'm rereading certain parts and seeing things differently now. And for a lot of people, you know, who weren't alive during the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan waged what was called the War on Drugs in 1982, ironically, during a time when illegal drug use was on the decline. So why do we need this war on drugs? Illegal drug use is on the decline. Mysteriously, 3 years later, crack gets introduced into black communities, mysteriously. And then the media just gets inundated with all this imagery of crack whores, crack babies, and it's all Black people using crack. And now our police get militarized. We have SWAT teams, and we make it permissible to stop and frisk without probable cause. And it blew my mind because I'm like, Black people have been so criminalized to the point where when George Floyd gets shot and or gets choked and killed for no reason, the first thing we think, even as Arabs, is what did he do though? But come on, he did. He like it was a fake check. Like really, and it's because we are being brainwashed, but we expect other people to not be brainwashed when they paint us as terrorists. It's the same media movement that's like painting us in everyone else's eyes, and it all just kind of boils down to fear.
That parallel is so amazing. Just thinking about that. I mean, and that's just it. It's just, and I think those were the connections I was making. And when I was thinking about Alushi and the situation, it was just thinking about, and I wasn't really thinking about the war on terror. I was just thinking about how law enforcement and the abuse of their power and how it's affected my family. And then everything that we're seeing on the news, and there's that relationship. But when you bring to light that, you know, like you named it right there, that is the parallel, the exact parallel. It's war on terror and war on drugs. I mean, why is it that we are able to say that the war on terror is bullshit, but then not be able to say that, and we question others when it comes to the war on drugs?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I think, like, as you know, my brain is just fried trying to think of how we can like find more ways to engage our community in these conversations. And actually, before we get into that part, I think one part that we didn't get to yet with you is just the ways that this conviction, so other stuff that's in this book is that when the second someone gets branded a criminal, even if they spend 0 time in jail, it follows them. They can get their license taken away. They can lose their right to vote. They can lose their right to sit on a jury. It's just basically a way to keep people, you know, oppressed and not part of mainstream society. And with your brother, alhamdulillah, the charges got dropped. But even then, I want you to speak to the ways that it's followed you and your family.
So I think this is where I commented on one of your posts, and it was about mass incarceration and the evolution of slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my immediate thought was, there are these levels of slavery. It's not one particular picture of slavery, right? And so even though, again, I feel like I need to make a point that as much as this has inconvenienced us, it's an inconvenience compared to what's happened to others. And however, it's things like this, you don't have to be charged with something for it to stick and for it to be an inconvenience or to follow you for the rest of your life. So for example, I went over to Lebanon in 2015. I decided to teach abroad. I wanted to teach in Lebanon. And my husband was pursuing, he graduated with a law degree, so he wanted to go back and continue, you know, get his, complete his internship there. And so I was teaching there. And when I was teaching there, I needed a bank account, right? So I go to open up a bank account and I'm waiting. I wait like 3 hours before they come out, and they're asking me, how are you related, or how do you know Ali Saiki? And I'm like, that's my brother. And I'm thinking that maybe this person like knows my brother or something. Like I'm telling you, I'm still in denial. And my husband was with me, and he's like, he thought he knew him, like he went to school with him or something, like he was from Dearborn. And he's like, well, and he was being really serious too. He's like, well, your name was red flagged because of him. And so it's going to take some time for it to be, you know, to go through clearance. So we waited and waited and waited forever. We had to talk to the bank manager at the time. And it wasn't until my husband, because my husband had connections to someone who knew someone who kind of helped get that clearance taken care of. But we were there for a very long time.
Crazy.
You
All
know,
the way
and
up.
it's not even about just waiting. It's about you're not even thinking about the situation, and all of a sudden it comes back. It's like a reminder that this thing happened. You know,
Wow.
for Alushi, I know that one time he got a phone call. He finds out that his bank account, his Chase bank account, gets closed for no reason. So he's like, "What's going on? Like, why did my account get closed?" And they're like, "Well, your account was red flagged, so they just closed it. They didn't give me any other reason." So he had to go and pick up his, get his money pulled out, and he had to open up an account somewhere else. But
It's
things
just
like that.
literally bullying. It's like bullying and reminding you we can still get you if we want to.
And the charges were dropped, Rima.
And the charges were dropped. And that's why, again, from this book that I keep referring to endlessly, just go freaking watch my summaries, people, please, if you don't want to read it, because it's just crazy. It completely changes the way that at least I look at the world. We talk a lot, and when we talk about people who have been in prison, when they are released, we call it reentry. That there's this cycle where people often re-enter prison if they've been in prison one time. And one of the things that she says is to stop using the term re-entry, or like re-entry into society, because there's now this like different alternate society that people enter into after being labeled a criminal, because a lot of their human rights have been stripped. And again, like, this is a powerful example of your brother wasn't even convicted. Like, the charges were dropped, and yet he's still being bullied. And you mentioned on the phone your dad and your brother, being stopped at the Canadian border for hours, and knowing that it's because of this one thing that happened falsely too. And I think just hearing you talk about the trauma that your family still experienced and how you haven't been able to talk to them about it for 14 years, really, I don't know, it just, like, the shame and the trauma that other communities, specifically the Black community, has to experience, with this being a constant thing looming over them, that the people that we pay, to protect us are actually, at least for the Black community, not seen that way. They're not seen as a protective force. They're seen as an antagonizing force. And just because we don't experience that in Dearborn, and just because we can call the cops when something is going wrong because we feel that that's what they're there for, doesn't mean that everybody else sees it that way, specifically the Black community, in some places even the Latinx community. And I think that's something that, like, to our earlier point around caring about other people and stepping in, like, we just need to educate ourselves, educate each other, help us see it this way, because there really is a right or wrong side to be on right now. And I fear that a lot of us are, I don't know if it cut me off, but I was saying I just fear that a lot of us are standing on the wrong side of all of this.
So that brings us to this conversation that we had about the passiveness that goes on. And it's not even just about being on the wrong side. It's it's the passiveness. And where does this passiveness come from? Like, I'm not necessarily saying go out and protest at every protest you find, that's out there. That's not even the point. A lot of the times I find that, or at least I think, that the passiveness comes from because people are not sure. And I get that. And sometimes it takes time for people to process that. And so they stay quiet. I get that. But for the most part, I feel like because it hasn't hit home for them, even though they're unsure, they're okay with remaining unsure. And that's where it becomes a little dangerous.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. So I think that it's also part of the passiveness can come from being afraid of saying the wrong thing. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of people are being called racist for like anything. And so we're so afraid to say the wrong thing so that we're not looked at as being racist, instead of us having empathy and compassion with each other through this process, so that, people can, even if we have racist thought, we got to remember that where did these thoughts come from? It's not because we're bad people that we have these thoughts. We are part of this system. We're a part of this particular society, you know?
And Arabs benefit from this system too. We need to remember that.
Right. But the point is that before we even recognize this, we have to recognize that we're part of a system. We're products of it. So the thought process that we have and what we think is because of this process. It's not because we're bad people. But now what the issue is that what are you doing to question your process? What are you doing when something like this comes up and it's challenging your thinking?
Exactly.
What are you doing about that?
Yeah.
You know?
I love the part that you said earlier about it's okay to change your mind. And I think that a lot of times in our community, and I think for the purposes of this conversation right now, we're specifically talking about within our own community, within our own friends or family group who tend to be other Arab in Dearborn, like not getting so defensive, not feeling like we need to like stick to these belief systems, but being open to learning, being open to constantly reflecting on our thoughts and questioning them. But there's this dynamic that I see a lot, that I was a part of at some points in my life, for sure, definitely when I was in college, where people who, you know, get enlightened or woke or become activists or whatever you want to call it, I believe I'm all of those things. So I'm not making fun of us. What I'm making fun of is the way that we believe change happens sometimes is by like, just for lack of better terminology, we just start shitting on each other. Like we don't start teaching each other. We don't start trying to, you know, talk to the person that we were 2 years ago, really. You know, that's really the main point that I think even I fail to realize at some points, is that, you know, I can just speak to my story. I grew up in Dearborn, East Dearborn, went to Fortson. I said a lot of dumb racist things because that was the world I grew up in, and I'm not excusing it. It's just what it was. And I went to college, read a few books, you know, had friends from outside of my community, started learning things, and then I hated Dearborn instantaneously. And why did I hate Dearborn? Ironically, running the Dearborn Girl page now, but I realized as an adult now, being more mature, I hated Dearborn because I was so ashamed that I once was a person who perpetuated racism. I once was a person who perpetuated, you know, injustices against other people, said probably very offensive, harmful things. And I didn't want to ever be found out that I was that person. So I thought that the way to maintain my status as this woke, like elite, enlightened individual was to shit on my own people, you know, and the way that this would happen.
Like, I'm not like that kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, I'm not
like them.
Yeah. Even if it was just us, like even if it was just around people in Dearborn, I'd go to bonfires every weekend, even when I went to Michigan and Ann Arbor, and someone would say the N-word, and instead of like having the or maybe they'd say Abid, instead of having the conversation, I would just cuss them out in front of everybody. You know, I was that girl that would be like da 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 and just embarrass them, which is not nearly an effective strategy, because they're probably just not going to say it in front of me now. You know, they're probably not going to change the way they think.
Right. That's not changing anything. That's just.
It's not changing anything.
Right. It's just what so they're going to be more careful around you, and they're probably not going to say it around you. But who's to say that they're not thinking it, or they're not using that terminology with another group of friends?
And their ego might make them want to hold on to it stronger now and defend it. Like, no, I don't care. You know? And so I think the point that I try to make with this, especially now, is that this is not an issue that affects our lives directly the way that it affects the Black community. Like, anti-Blackness, police brutality does not affect us in the ways that it affects Black people. And so as people who call ourselves, you know, activists or whatever we want to say, it is literally our job to educate those around us and find a language or a tone or a strategy that actually works on our parents, on our friends, on the ignorant person in your group chat. Like, it doesn't matter how it makes you feel, because, and this is me talking to my former self, like centering my emotions about it and cussing the person out. I just lost out on an opportunity to change somebody's mind. And now there is one more person roaming the world being racist, and that's on my watch. And that was my fault because I missed that opportunity. And that's kind of like the divide that I see. I see a lot of people who, with the right conversations, maybe the right like environment, could do better, but it is kind of on us who know better to be like creating that environment for more people, even if we don't think it's our responsibility. Like it kind of is at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, just again, going back to the idea of being empathetic, compassionate, you know, with each other, so that we're not afraid of saying the wrong thing, but being able to talk about that.
Yeah.
Trying to understand where this stems from,
Right.
you know, rather than saying, or rather than judging is really what
Yeah.
it is. Trying to understand where that stems from. So even if you think it's a racist thought, try to understand where it's coming from, you know, and then maybe that will help someone or that person just kind of think about those things. And you can say, well, maybe, well, what about, have you thought about this? You know, like, and sometimes, you know, and you can bring up some uncomfortable things into the conversation.
Exactly.
But it just won't feel so like
judgy.
Yeah, like the person is.
Nobody likes feeling judged.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Here's the thing. Okay, so there was a situation where I had changed my perspective on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, my original perspective was based on a very horrible connection that I made, right? We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's another thing is that when we had conversation later on, even though I had already changed my perspective and I had all the reasons for why I changed it, after we talked about it and we talked about the comparison that I made, and what you said something along the lines, and I'm going to bring it up, but you said something along the lines of, well, I don't know how they think in Lebanon, but, and then you said, you gave that example of like the plantation, right?
Mm.
I don't know if I should go into this, but I feel like it's going to go off on somewhat of a
okay. Yeah.
But the point is that I went back and I started thinking about it, and it's like, okay, so this is probably what's going on. A lot of the times things are not black and white. There is this gray space, okay, and it's based on people's experiences where they make these connections. Right. But here's the thing. Once you start to have these conversations, you can look at the different connections that people are making, and then you can draw a better understanding of what is a better like viewpoint, or like a better choice or a better decision, whatever it is. And for me, I realized that when you said that, I started thinking back, because I made a connection to the prison that was in South Lebanon. And I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, the prison, me going through that prison and seeing what that prison was like, and I feel like I'm giving a lot of, just kind of, if you feel like I need to give some background information.
I'll give like quick background.
Okay.
So basically the background is that the prison in Lebanon, that was like, I think it was used, Israel used it to oppress and like imprison and torture Lebanese or Palestinian people. And Palestinian people. And that for you was a powerful experience. They still have it there. They still had it there at the time.
Right.
But as like a museum showcase kind of thing. And I felt like, I don't know if that's cultural in Lebanon to kind of showcase that so that people can see the trauma and the history. But specifically for Black people, like to me, I would see like in America showcasing a plantation, and that's kind of like putting people's trauma on blast, and who wants to do that? So right. I just thought it was an interesting.
So that's where after our phone call, I was just thinking about that particular point that you made. And it wasn't until you brought up the plantation that I thought, oh my gosh, it's not about me and what I'm experiencing when I go through that prison, but what about somebody's family who's been in there, you know? Yeah. What about them? So it's more about being more mindful. Like what's more mindful is really what we need to start thinking about.
I love that.
You know?
I love that. Yeah. I've never been on live with someone for this long. So apparently we have a minute left, but I think I'm so happy you actually brought that in. And I don't think it's a tangent, because I think that mindfulness is like the theme, actually. Like I didn't even realize that was the unifying theme of everything. But I think it's just the idea that something shouldn't have to impact you for you to care. But especially if it doesn't impact you directly, that is when you need to exercise mindfulness, because you'll never understand it. Like you're not going to understand it. I'm going to try to summarize and kind of conclude in the next 40 seconds. But I just want to say that I love you. And
I love you too.
I'm so like grateful that we were able to talk about this. I think it's unfortunate that it's under these circumstances. But I'm just so proud of you and the way that you advocate for the community. And I'm sure your brother and family are watching and feel very proud of the way that you, told this story.
Goes both ways, Rima. Really, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. So this will be saved. Please send it to your friends. Encourage them to listen. It'll be saved on IGTV as well as on our podcast.